We actually are, and so I didn't realize I was on mute. The last like 3 words of your sentence were live, so we're live now on my channel.
Okay. All right, welcome, folks, to the Rage and the Synagogue. Tonight is a debate between the channel owner of the Synagogue, CJ Cox, and Nakasuchi, the owner of the Rage channel. We're simulcasting to both. Tonight's topic is was biblical slavery ethical? And as you might imagine, CJ is on the yes side of that proposition, and Nakasuchi is on the no side of that proposition. I was just in the midst of typing this into CJ's chat. If you have any questions for the two of them, which we will do a Q&A at the end of the debate, please tag me in CJ's chat. Same thing goes for Knox chat. Any questions you have, and I will do my level best to keep track of both channels' questions from the audience. And the way this is going to work is we're going to have up to 10-minute openings. Knox said his isn't quite 10 minutes, but CJ, no matter how long Knox ends up being,
so go ahead, John.
What? So nobody heard me on your stream?
No, they heard you, but they didn't hear me. Yeah.
All right.
These buttons.
Yeah. The way this is going to work is there's going to be 10-minute openings, as I said, and CJ, you can feel free to take up to 10 minutes, regardless of how long Knock takes. He said his is under 10 minutes, and then there'll be a 40-minute back and forth convo. There's not going to be any rebuttal. Usually, you might have 10-minute openings and 5-minute rebuttals. We're just going to go right into the one-on-one conversation back and forth. They've done this before several times. I don't see me having to moderate too much. They usually, handle that rather well. That's not to say that it won't maybe get dumpster fires at time to time, because they've had some heated discussions in the past. So, but usually both of them handle themselves, quite nicely and don't really get talking over one another. But yeah, again, the topic is it was biblical slavery ethical, and let me set a timer here. And then we're going to let CJ go first since he is in the affirmative. Is that cool with both of you guys?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me.
And let's see here. Forgive me and my boomer abilities to handle all these freaking screens I have set up here. And this is... All right, so anybody want to help me figure out how to use this timer? All right, here we go. All right, on your first word, I will start the 10-minute clock, CJ.
All righty. Just 1 second. I do have it's not really prepared open marks, just sort of I don't know what you'd call that, I guess. Just a structure for myself, nonetheless.
And just so you know, I was adept enough to know not to start the clock when you said alrighty. Even though that was your first word.
Cool.
For sure. All right, and so I am going now. So, and Rage for being here with me today. I'm actually the issuer of this challenge, so obviously it's nice when people offer to have a discussion with you, but at the same time, it's always nice to have. Appreciate you guys showing up, obviously, in the audience. So hopefully this will be a pretty interesting conversation. The thesis before us today, of course, is the question: was, whatever you'd like to say, biblical slavery ethical, right? Now, to be clear, right, the reason that it's phrased in that particular way is because I do think that the question, does the Old Testament of the Bible condone slavery, is kind of a no-brainer. I think it's a little bit ridiculous that people even agree to have that conversation as if there's any sort of a side for no. There's not. and I will be honest with you, I even find it to be dishonest for Christian apologists to come up and say, no, it does not. There's obviously things that people will claim that I myself agree with that, we'll try to, give what you guys would call an apologetic for it or something like that, right? But just saying outright, no, it doesn't actually have any sort of condoning of the practice of slavery is just incorrect, right? And so I would like to have us as apologists move past that and be a little bit more honest. So the question obviously is phrased in the way, is biblical slavery ethical? Because I believe that biblical slavery, if indeed it was followed the way that it was supposed to be, so in assuming that people are not violating the laws or anything like that, that it was actually an ethical practice, and that in the end, it's actually not terribly different, though it is a little bit different from a lot of things that even exist to this day. The idea that we have gotten completely rid of this, servitude that was very common in the past, I think is a complete falsehood, and hopefully I will have the ability to prove so here today. But first off, let's get into some of the details about biblical slavery. So the first thing, if you're reading just beginning to end of the book, that you're going to actually see in regards to the laws about slavery is Exodus 21. If you're taking the traditional understanding of these books, Exodus 21 would be written by Moses sometime around the 1400 BC. Modern scholars a lot of times do like to date that closer to 600 to 700 BC. Whatever position you take, very old, right? Start saying, these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. Them is the children of Israel. And then we go straight into discussions about slaves. So if thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th year he shall go free for nothing. So what we see here is obviously the at least for the Israelite, at least for the person who you are kin with, right? You are actually not allowed to have people serve not only for an indefinite period of time, but even for any period longer than a mere 6 years, right? Most people have had their jobs longer than 6 years. If he came by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then he shall go out with him, right? In other words, something that we actually did not see in a lot of other places, you're not allowed to buy somebody from their family, right, and then break up that family. That's not actually how that works. If his master has given him a wife and he has borne him sons or daughters, his wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. We see there's an exception to what I just said, right? If it turns out that there is actually, that the people who were, or the person, I should say, who was married to this person is actually a slave themselves, they have their own debt, and the master does have the ability to, keep them to that. Then his master shall bring him unto the judge. I skipped a verse. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or onto the doorpost. And his master shall bore his ear with an awl. So it's like an earring, right? You just pierce your ears so that everybody knows that they are a slave. He shall serve him forever. So what do we see here? Obviously, we see that it was apparently common enough for people to actually love their masters that they would want to stay forever. And that this is actually something that is legislated, right? It was apparently common enough that this is something that was actually legislated. Sorry, I worded it terribly, right? We do see there is potentially other reasons here for the servant to actually want to stay, for example, the family and the wife. But as it turns out, which we see in Deuteronomy, which I probably won't be able to get to because it's only 10 minutes, but in Deuteronomy, I believe 24, it might be 23, we see reference to this exact same thing, but without the context of the family, implying that this is something that was apparently relatively common. People would just want to stay with their master's family or no family, right? If a man sell his daughter to a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men's servants do. So there's different rules depending on if they are female or male servants. What are the different rules for female servants? If she pleases not her master, right, full stop right off the bat. What does it mean if she pleases not her master? I think you could probably use your imagination and take a guess as to what this means. But since we want to be blunt about things and not have to use our imaginations, for the most part, when you are having some sort of a situation where a father is selling his daughter, chances are it is for some sort of a marriage or concubinage, right? In other words, you're not selling them to be laborers, right? The man sell his maidservant, she shall not go as the men servants do. If she does not please her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed to sell her unto a strange nation. He shall have no power. So we see here that there's actually protections of the person in this situation, right? Which of course would make sense. If you have a situation where the family themselves is wanting to give their daughter away, probably because of some level of poverty or something like that, or to ensure a better life for her, they probably want to have protections around their daughter, right? They probably want to make sure that she is not treated as a slave or a servant, but is actually treated as a wife would be. And so we see here she's not allowed to be sold. If he has betrothed her unto her son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife,
You're
her food,
bonding
her
just a
raiment.
little bit, but not. You seem to get better there.
Sorry about that, guys. So what we see here is basically if you have a maidservant, right, they are to be treated either as wives or as daughters. They are not actually to be treated as slaves. This is a pretty impressive, what would you call that, protection for the female slaves, considering the fact that sex slavery and temple prostitution were actually the norm in the Mideast, not only in the 1400s, but also in the 600s, regardless of when you think this was actually written. We have, continuing on with this, about things where it says if he, let's see, what's the verse here in particular? I don't want to actually waste my time, so I won't go with the verse in particular. But kidnapping, if you kidnap a person, you actually receive the death penalty. This is actually repeated in Deuteronomy 24:7. It's somewhere here in Exodus 21, but I don't want to spend all my time just searching for it. We also see here in Exodus 21 that if you kill a slave, you get the death penalty. This is incredibly unique in the Middle East. For example, in the Code of Hammurabi, there is a punishment for killing a slave. It is a monetary punishment. You have to pay 30 shekels of silver, or the standard price
you
of a slave. If you indeed
robot it really bad, I would repeat
in
the
the
last.
Hebrew here, we actually.
Hold on, I'm trying to tell you that you repeat. No, you should repeat the last two sentences because they totally roboted out, dude.
All right, absolutely. So what I was saying there is that the killing of a slave is punishable actually by death, according to Exodus 21, which is an incredibly unique thing in this code because, for example, the Code of Hammurabi from the self-same area, and if the traditional dates are true, the self-same era, actually does give a punishment for killing a slave, but it's the standard price of a slave at that time, 30 shekels of silver. In the Hebrew, or in the Hebrew law, I should say, we actually see the word punished is used in the English, but the Hebrew word that is actually used there is a word which is always used to indicate punishment by death. In other words, you kill a slave, you die for it. We see protections such as if you cause serious cosmetic damages to your slave, the slave is to go free. In particular, we mention the book mentions the gouging of the eye and the chipping of the tooth, but as has been pointed out by numerous scholars who are not Christians, by the way, for example, Dr. Josh Bowen, one we all know, this is not meant to say, oh, you can do anything you want so long as you're not chipping the tooth and gouging the eye. The idea is, no, you're not actually allowed to. Corporal punishment is allowed, but there are limits. You're not allowed to just go out here and start wailing on your slaves. These are
1 minute warning.
Thank you. So on and so forth. With that, if you have a beast who kills a slave, there's a punishment for the beast's owner. That varies depending on whether or not the beast was actually known to gorge people or not. We see in Leviticus 25 that slaves are protected under the Sabbath laws, and that means Sabbath day, Sabbath year, and feasts. You cannot work them to the bone. Every 50 years, there's a jubilee, so all people are freed every 50 years. This idea that people are going to be passed on generation to generation is not true. There's a jubilee every 50 years, and that would be liberty throughout the entire land, including for the foreigner. Israelites, at least, must be paid, but we see in verse 49, all slaves can indeed prosper. Deuteronomy 15, we see debts are canceled for Israelites every 7 years. If you release slaves, they are to be given food, clothing, and other provisions so that you do not release them back into the poverty that you got them from. You're to remember that you yourselves were slaves and foreigners.
That's time, but go ahead and take up to 20 seconds to wrap up because I interrupted you in there once.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. What you see here, basically, though, is a incredibly unique, both for the time and even for the the slavery that we would have in the future, right? And especially the African slave trade, which is one of the worst examples of slavery in the entire history of the world. What we see here is a consistent pattern of remember that you were foreigners, remember that you were slaves, treat these people with respect, and indeed, the whole point of this slave system is meant to bring people out of poverty, out of homelessness and things of that nature, not to subjugate them as it is in other systems. We'll obviously get more into that in the future, but I don't want to take too much time.
All right, very good. And so now we're going to go to Knox opening statement. As soon as I can get the timer set, and I will start the timer on your first word, Knox.
Awesome, thank you. I'll address a lot of his argumentations in the open discussion. I noticed that you stayed clear away from the chattel slavery as far as away as you could get. You focused on the debt slavery. That'll be interesting in open conversation. I would like to thank CJ for having this debate with me, and I am expected it will be a fruitful conversation, as are most of our exchanges. I want to thank John for moderating, and I want to thank everyone that will see this debate for their interest in this knowledge, in this issue. I think it is important, even though it is somewhat of a no-brainer to me. I think it's important to first lay out some definitions. What is ethics? Ethics are defined as moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. What is ethical? That is defined as relating to moral principles or the branch of knowledge dealing with these. There is no debate here. Slavery is unethical. Whether it was in Israel, here in the South, or wherever it has reared its ugly head throughout the course of history. In fact, slavery is one of the things that almost every human being on this planet can agree is wrong. Well, almost everyone. Hearing CJ's arguments here, I'm not sure if he does. Even those who practice slavery here in the modern age don't try to defend it. They make excuses or attempts to hide it in order not to be caught, which suggests that they know they are doing wrong. Why is slavery wrong? There has to be a reason for it. Why would it be unethical? I would be remiss if I were not to cover that here in this debate. Slavery increases total human unhappiness. The slave owner treats the slaves as the means to achieve the slave owner's ends, not as an end in themselves. Slavery exploits and degrades human beings. Slavery violates human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights explicitly forbids slavery and many other practices associated with slavery. That was something we did as a progressing world, as progressing human beings. I remind you, that is not something God ever did, then or now. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Slavery uses force or the threat of force on other human beings. Slavery leaves a legacy of discrimination and disadvantage. Slavery is both the result and the fuel of gender discrimination. Slavery perpetuates the abuse of children. I could go on and on. There really is no debate here. The only debate is if indeed ancient Israel had chattel slavery. And that debate is long settled by history and by the Bible itself. In fact, slavery in Israel does have some similarities to the slavery we have here in the South that we all find abhorrent. CJ said it in his opening statement that it was abhorrent. Well, not all. Some merely pretend, some are white supremacists. The primary similarity I want to focus on is the discipline of the chattel slave. Chattel slavery is for life. It is the complete possession of a human being. This existed here in the South as well as in ancient Israel. Both ancient Israel and the South had a right to beat their slaves in order to discipline them. A practice society is deemed without morality or ethic. Exodus 21:20-21 is intended to mitigate this abuse for sure, but does so in a way that allows and encourages the corporal punishment of chattel slaves, something CJ admitted in his opening. Laws throughout the South did this very thing as well, wrestling with the issue of disciplining slaves since before we were even our own country. Thomas Morris writes in his book, Southern Slavery and the Law, concerning a 1669 law in Virginia, the lawmakers began with an obvious problem. Slaves could not be punished by the extension of their time in servitude, so that their obstinacy could only be suppressed by violence. In other words, threats of using a lengthening of service was unavailable to the slaveholder, since slavery was for life. Instead, it was determined the only means to ensure good behavior in service from a slave was physical correction. In a 1723 law in Virginia, this reasoning resulted in the freedom of a master to beat their slave without retribution, so long as it was done for correction. Morris writes, quote, the law provided that there would be no punishment or prosecution if a slave died by reason of any stroke or blow given during his or her correction, end quote. In South Carolina in 1740, we see that Christianity provided some motivation to avoid abusing one's slave. Cruelty is not only highly unbecoming those who profess themselves Christian, but is odious in the eyes of all men who have any sense of virtue or humanity, end quote. Surprisingly, at least to our modern senses, the penalty for murdering a slave under this South Carolina law was a fine of 700 pounds, and the guilty party was not allowed to hold public office. Establishing that a death by beating rose to the level of murder was a difficult case to prove in such circumstances. The laws appear to have inadvertently allowed great loopholes in the legal system. After the Revolution, sentiment seemed to change throughout the country when it comes to the murder of slaves as punishment. Concerning this period, Morris concludes in his book, quote, whatever the variations, the trend was clear. Unless slaves resisted or died under moderate correction for some misconduct, their killing usually would be placed on a level with the homicide of whites, end quote. So we have very similar codes on how slaves were treated, and most of us, find Southern slavery to be abhorrent. If it isn't clear by most of us, I mean there are racists out there. And CJ, who was answering yes to this question tonight, not to say that CJ is a racist. Now, this is an apple-to-apple comparison, and I am by no means comparing the practices of the South here in the United States to the practices of ancient Israel. I am merely comparing the laws of the given chattel slaveries. So to answer the question, is or was biblical slavery ethical? It is a resounding hell no. Thank you. I can see the rest of my time.
All right. And that was just under 7 minutes. And now we're going to go into the back and forth mode. And I know there's another name for that my boomer brain can't come up with. But they're just going to have an open conversation. There it is right there. Open conversation between the two of them. I would ask both of our interlocutors here to allow your interlocutor to, when you ask them a question, to answer the question fully, and even if you wholeheartedly disagree with what they're saying, let them finish their answer. I would say, as far as the questions answers go, try and be as pithy as possible with your answers. Try not to repeat the same point over and over again, so we can, get as much out of this 40 minutes as we can. And I would say that as soon as I get this timer set, I will throw it to CJ to, okay. I'm going to let him get the ball rolling on this, but I cannot, for the life of me.
If you're on my channel, we're used to it. So CJ's audience, John is a boomer. He admits this freely.
Yep. And it just will not. Okay, here we go. And then that's supposed to be. All right, so CJ, you can get the ball rolling, ask a question or whatever you want to start it with, rebut one of his points, and I will start the timer on your first word.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things that I would want to say. So the first thing is, so I hear this quite frequently, this idea that this was a that people could actually be owned for life. And while there is technically a situation where people can be owned for life, either in the form of they themselves obviously agreeing to it, or if somebody happened to have been bought on the earlier stages of the Jubilee. Leviticus 25 is quite clear that the Jubilee proclaims freedom throughout the land for all of its inhabitants. So in other words, if somebody was purchased 4 years ago and they're a foreigner, right? Sure, they don't have the 6-year rule that protects them in that particular sense, but the Jubilee is about to happen. So 4 years down the road, they are still to be freed and indeed returned to their property and their clan. And again, it's very clear in Leviticus 25 that is to proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all of its inhabitants. So that's the first thing I just want to correct as far as the record is concerned here. No slavery, foreigner or otherwise, in the Bible is actually meant to be a slavery that is continuous and into multiple generations even. That's just absolutely not the case.
Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, both thy bondmen, and I'm reading the King James Version, so when I say bondman, it means slave. Both thy bondmen and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen that are round about you, and them shall ye buy bondmen and bondmaids. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. And you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession, that they shall be your bondmen forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over one another with rigor. That clearly says forever.
Right, so in that exact same chapter, right, this is the exact same chapter, Leviticus 25, we also read,
earlier when
you
it's
shall
talking,
hallow the 50th
earlier
year.
when it's talking about Israelites, right?
Actually,
when it's talking about Israelites, when it's talking about Israelite
thou shalt number
servants.
7 Sabbaths a year. No, actually, it says very clearly. Hang on, it says very clearly here. Thou shalt number shall be unto thee 49 years. Thou shalt cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall you make the trumpet sound throughout all your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. Proclaim liberty throughout all of the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and you shall return every man into his possession, and you shall return every man unto his family. So it is true that if this person happened to pass away before we actually had some kind of a jubilee, yes, that you can actually give him.
Hold on, Doc. Hold on. Go ahead and repeat your last sentence there, CJ, because we couldn't hear it.
Yeah, so the point being that it is true that it does that the Bible does actually provide for if the owner happens to pass away before there is a jubilee, then they are to pass on these slaves to their children. That's definitely the case. However, it is also very clear in the exact same chapter, not just the exact same book, the exact same chapter, that there is a jubilee to be proclaimed throughout all of the land and to all of its inhabitants. That does include foreigners, as we see numerous times in the Bible. You are to have the same law for the foreigner and for the native born. The only exception to that appears in the 6-year rule.
Let Knock respond to that before you throw too many points out.
You're clearly making that for the foreigner when it's not, and pretty much no historian agrees with you. You're clearly talking earlier in Leviticus 25 when it is clearly talking about the Israelites. It begins speaking about the Israelites in that form of slavery, which is debt slavery. There was no redeeming for a foreign slave. There was no jubilee for a foreign slave. You know this. I mean, you know this. You're trying to conflate the two. You're trying to say same chapter. So it's obviously it means everybody. No, it's clearly talking earlier in this chapter about debt slavery, which would be Israelite slaves. You cannot take an Israelite and treat them as a slave. An Israelite can go free after 7 years. That is referring to Israelites. I just read you the chapter clearly. The law that states a foreign slave is to be kept forever and given as an inheritance. There's nothing 7 or 15 years about that, CJ.
Okay, I also just read you clearly, though. So clearly, what's happening here, right? One of our interpretations here allows this chapter to be consistent with itself, and one does not. Right now, you just said you made a claim that this is clearly about the Hebrew servants. The thing is, this isn't actually about servants at all. Right. And I knew you were going to bring this up because everybody always brings this up. This particular passage is talking about the Sabbath years and then eventually gets into the Jubilee. They're not talking about servants in any way. It just so happens that the Jubilee also proclaims liberty throughout all the land and unto the inhabitants thereof. By the way, all the inhabitants thereof. It doesn't say all of the Hebrews thereof. You can read the entire thing, from verse 1 to verse 11. You don't find any mention of Hebrews or Israelites.
All
it's
right,
just
so
not there.
Let's settle. We'll settle with this. And
I'm sorry, that's a fact.
I am not granting that all Israelite slavery was debt slavery. In fact, hardly anybody grants that. You say in your opening that you're going to come on here and you're going to be honest, and you understand. Nobody grants that. Not even Christian scholars don't grant that. There was definite clear chattel slavery.
I didn't say it was all debt slavery. What I said is that the Jubilee proclaims liberty.
So what historical evidence do you have that in that Jubilee that actual foreign slaves were ever released? Because there's no historical data of that. It clearly says that foreign slaves are to be an inheritance, and there's also a loophole that allows for you to keep a Israelite slave forever. But let's get to the.
I'm sure we'll get to that in a second.
Let's get to the gist of it all.
So first off, there's no. Hang on.
Well,
first
clearly,
off,
let's get
there's
to
no
the
historical.
Is indentured servitude ethical,
context for any of these situations at all, right?
Is debt slavery ethical?
Hold on, guys. You're talking over one another. CJ had started to respond to your last point. Let's allow him to do that, and then go ahead, CJ.
But I mean, we should start off with the fact that indentured servitude, debt slavery, is not ethical.
Okay, but hang on. Again, we're not. This is not even. You keep saying this is talking specifically about debt slavery. It's not even talking specifically about servitude in any way.
Well,
it's talking only about the Sabbath years
servitude?
and the collection of Sabbath. No, hang on.
Is this debate
this
about
is a very
slavery?
important point.
Guys! Hey! Stop.
On, dude.
Okay, you're not going to talk over one another. You're making it horrible for the audience. You guys got to talk one at a time. And CJ, you were in the middle of talking, and then you can respond to him. But again, CJ, try and be as pithy as possible. Let's have a back and forth. Try not to go on and on. That goes to both of you. But go ahead, CJ.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, the beginning of Leviticus 25 is not about debt servitude. It's not about chattel servitude. It's not about servitude. It's about the Sabbath years and the Jubilee, which comes after a Sabbath of Sabbath years, or 49 years. It is a perk of that Jubilee that all throughout all the land and to all of the inhabitants, which is a direct quote from this chapter, I just read it to you, right, are given liberty, given back to their clans, or given back to their property, right? Now, again, my interpretation of this allows Leviticus 25 to be consistent with itself. Yours does not. Yours assumes that there is some kind of a contradiction in the book of Leviticus, specifically in the chapter 25.
My interpretation is based off of biblical scholarship and what history says.
Yeah, well, hang on. You can, and by the way, take this to you. Like I said, we both know Dr. Josh, so you can take it to him personally, but you can take it to other scholars as well.
Chat right now.
That's not actually true, and I can tell you why I know for a fact that's not actually true. We don't have records of the Israelite monarchy and how they operated outside of the Bible. They don't exist.
Well, we do have several resources. That's a different discussion. You're trying to get us sidetracked. I asked you a very specific question. Is indentured servitude ethical?
So actually, I am here prepared to make the argument that if practiced in the biblical way, it is. And I have evidence for that. So we have something like anywhere from 600,000 to 1.5 million homeless people in the United States, right? Now, what is worse? To have 1.5 million people who are homeless, or to have people who are actually being taken care of, food, clothing, all that sort of stuff, by the richest among us, like people like the Bezoses and stuff like that, requiring those people to treat them in a way that actually gets them off of their feet and pull them out of poverty. Because again, it needs to be noted, slavery in the Bible was actually designed to pull people out of poverty. That was the whole reason it existed in the first place. And that's straight up from the scriptures, by the way. That's explicitly what the Bible says when somebody sells themselves to you because they have become poor. That's actually the reason why you give the Israelite a bunch of product when they leave.
You are sitting here and saying that if I were to develop enough debt in life that I could not pay it back, to sell myself and to Jeff Bezos to accept the selling of myself, that would be an ethical practice. You're sitting here and maintaining that right now.
Absolutely, because what's the alternative? Debtor's prison, losing all of your stuff, being homeless, Right, like there's no
How
good
about
alternative to deal with debt.
How
This
about
allows you
socialism
not
is
only
a little
to get
better
out
than that,
of
and
the
you
debt,
demonize
but
the
to
hell out of
get
that.
back up to a position where you're no longer
Oh
impoverished.
my fucking God. You are suggesting that I sell myself into slavery instead of a political government that would bring economic equality to all. No, I'll sell myself to the rich oligarchs, CJ. For real? For real.
Again, like I said, there's no better alternative. In fact, what you just brought up was something that is
you're sitting here and saying
either
that
the social democracy or
yourself
socialism. I'm not sure exactly which direction you wish
you
to
are
go.
maintaining that.
But that just straight up doesn't work.
damn.
And I don't mean to get into that, obviously, because that's a political thing, but that just doesn't work. In fact, we've seen socialist nations, and they make everybody equally impoverished. That's how that ends up working out. So again, what is the alternative you actually provide that gets rid of 1.5 million people homeless, and so on and so forth? Well, because there's other things you can look at that too. There's 2 billion people in prison.
Let him respond. He's trying to respond to that question. Let him respond to you.
I mean, there was a whole bunch of rambling there. All right, so you're sitting here saying that it's ethical for a human being to own another human being because they have debt.
I am saying that is better than any alternative that anybody has presented to this day.
We don't have a better alternative now because people aren't owning people right now. And our system right now is pretty shitty.
And becoming homeless and not being able to buy anything and being impoverished. That's what's happening right now. So, and you even agree with that, by the way, because that's one of the biggest talking points you have as a progressive leftist. Would you not agree?
No, I would never agree with selling myself or
not that far.
Hold on. Let me interrupt real quick. We're doing a Q&A at the end, but somebody just asked a question that wouldn't make sense if I waited till the end to ask it. But Cider and Port asks CJ, we're 30 minutes into the debate, and you haven't presented a case for why slavery is ethical. Could you present that case? I mean, so you could respond to that, CJ, and of course, then Knock can respond to your response.
I mean, you're just clearly not paying attention. You might disagree with what I have said, Cider and Port, but I have certainly presented the case. The case is, number one, that slavery as practiced in the Bible was a system that was actually not only something that offered significant protections to the slave, but also was designed to pull people out of poverty. That is the end goal, right? And number two, that there has never been an alternative proposed that is better. Okay, like putting people in prisons is not better. Sending the SWAT team to people because they have incredible debts is not better. That's what we do today, right? So, I mean, and your guys' suggestion tends to be something along the lines of political Marxism, which has been disastrous. It's killed hundreds of millions of people.
When did they ever send a SWAT team over debt?
They do it quite frequently.
Really?
Actually, it's something that I have actually been. In fact, it's interesting that you don't know this because I, as somebody who has
your
been
boy Donald Trump
very
file bankruptcy like 4 or 5 different times.
Brutality and militarization.
When did they send the SWAT team against Donald Trump?
Hey, Knock. Here's the thing. Just so you know, I don't know why it's doing this, but like when you start talking, when he's talking, your mic is so low we can't even hear you anyway. So
y'all are just not telling
you gotta let you got to let each other finish, you know.
Well, if my mic is low, I need to know that.
What's that?
If my mic is low, I need to know that.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's low. It's fine when you're just talking. What I'm saying is there must be a difference between your two mics. When you get talking, when you both get talking together, it's unintelligible, but then you seem to just kind of like die out. You know what I mean? Like,
no.
I don't know what that's all about, but yeah, I mean, it just both of you just try not to talk over one another. Did you make your point there, CJ? Can we throw it over to Knock?
Yeah, I'm good on what I said.
Okay.
Leviticus 25:39-42 says, if your brother with you becomes so poor that he sells himself to you, you are not to make him serve like a bond slave. So you're not to make him serve like a foreign slave. There's a difference. There's clearly a difference made in Leviticus throughout chapter 25. Everybody knows this. All right, so instead, he is to serve with you like a hired servant or a traveler who lives with you until the year of Jubilee. Then he and his children with him may leave to return to his family and his ancestors' inheritance. Since they're my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, they are not to be sold as slaves. It clearly makes a distinction But I'm asking you this. This is my fundamental question, because I'm leaving so far chattel slavery out of it, although chattel slavery was a part of ancient Israel culture. You can say it wasn't all you want based on your interpretation or whatever. It was, CJ, and I'm sorry that you can't see that. You are sitting here saying that it would be a better system and morally ethical to, if my brother, who becomes so poor that he sells himself to me, that I am to make him like my servant. So I'm to make my brother like my servant, my brother. That's what it's saying, specific language.
What's wrong with being a servant? Well, why is that a problem? If
why is that
literally
ethical?
A hired profession?
Why is that the ethical thing in your worldview? That's, as I stated in my opening, I thought that most of us would agree
about being a
that
servant?
this was that slavery is unethical and immoral. What about slavery?
Okay, that's still an answer to the question, though. You just So you just asked me a question. Would it be ethical for me to have somebody as my servant, right, to help to get them out of debt? I asked you a very pointed question. What's wrong with being a servant?
Because this isn't like a servant. So
a hired
this isn't like a servant.
Waiter, butler.
Can I fucking answer? God damn.
Chefs, personal, like all that kind of stuff. Like, what is the issue with being a servant? I don't understand. In the middle of my sentence, interrupt the beginning of yours, as they say.
CJ, you got to give him a chance to answer, though. Rage, are you muted?
This is fucking ridiculous. All right, so servitude in ancient Israel is not like a server at your Applebee's. It's not like a server in the modern world in a rich person's house. We are talking, you own this person. You own the rights to this person. If you give this person a wife and a child, you get to own that wife and child for life, CJ. Clearly says it in the Bible. How is that ethical in your... How are you sitting here defending that, asking me a whole bunch of stupid fucking questions, and you're not getting to the point that how is this ethical? You're sitting here, what better solution? The solution, what we live in now today, as shitty as it is better than being owned by another human being. Owned is a very specific word. This is not, again, a servant in an Applebee's. This is slavery, whether it's in your debt slavery, which is a form of slavery. So servitude, slave, we're talking slaves here. How in any way on this earth is that ethical?
Well, again, there has to be corrections as to what you're saying, because you're not accurately representing what actually happened there. So, for example, you said that it goes on for life. I've already pointed out clearly, not only is that not true for any Hebrews, we all know this, but also liberty is proclaimed throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It is there in Leviticus. And again, your interpretation assumes that there is a contradiction there. Mine does not. Mine allows the chapter to harmonize with itself. Also, you make this claim, well, these people, they don't have any rights or anything like that. That's not true. That is clearly and explicitly not the case in the Bible. There's literally 3 different chapters dedicated to this in particular. For example, you're not allowed to kill them. You're not allowed to have any sort of cosmetic damage. You're not allowed to just sleep with slaves and have sex slavery and things like that, right? If you have any sort of a situation where you have a servant who is somebody you find attractive, you need to marry them. That has to be somebody who is literally your wife, your care. You have to provide them with literally everything you would to the person you fell in love with. That even includes if you do fall in love with someone later on. That's in Deuteronomy 23, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, right?
How is any of that ethical?
This idea, like they just don't have any rights, that isn't true. And by the way, there are different levels of ownership. I think we would all agree. I own my table. I own my dog. I don't own these things in the same way, right? Now, obviously, we don't have any sort of a situation like they did in ancient days where we actually have servants. So I can't, make that sort of a comparison. But you do get the idea still, right? There are things I can do to a table that I can't do to a dog. There's, in other words, different levels of ownership. The same was true back in those days. You're not going to treat a camel the same way that you're going to treat a person in most ancient Near East cultures, but particularly in Israel, where the idea was to pull people once again out of poverty.
I mean, I guess it's too bad your own Bible doesn't say that. Deuteronomy 20, 10 through 15. When thou comest nigh into a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it. And it shall be, if it make thee answer of peace, and open unto thee, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee. And if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. But the women, and the little ones, and the cattle, and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. Thus shalt thou do unto all the cities which are very far off from thee, which are not of the cities of these nations. That's ethical. That's your debt slavery. That's your ethical solution. Do we do this in war? Is this ethical in war nowadays, CJ?
So you hang on. You just said that that's not true, and then you quoted a verse rather that didn't disprove anything I said. In fact, it didn't even address anything I said. It's a completely different situation as far as what you did with captives of war, which we can address, but don't pretend that that's a response.
Well,
to what I just said.
I'm giving you up to this point of the debate the debt slavery, and you're sitting here pretending that there's no chattel slavery. I just read to you clear chattel slavery. I just read to you that not only
between foreigners.
What?
I have acknowledged this entire time there's a difference between the slavery that they had foreigners under and the slavery they had. There's absolutely difference.
No, you literally haven't.
The differences are not what you're making them out to be, right? Like I said, the Jubilee is not something that is only pertaining to one or the other. It's
you are
throughout all the land to all of its inhabitants. There's also other things about that too. Like for example,
so answer my question: is this ethical in war to you? What I just read. So
at that time, there was no better situation technologically speaking.
I'm asking you if it's
in the modern
ethical.
day, we do actually have the ability.
So, all right. So I read the definitions
you do understand
of what ethics are.
That
right?
ethics.
What? Yeah,
right, and so you do understand that if you are given a situation where you have multiple bad options, you're allowed to pick the least bad option, right? You understand that would be considered, and that would be perfectly consistent with an absolutist moral view like my own.
So you're saying that the good option was them killing everybody and then taking the women and the children as slaves. That's the good option. That's the only good option you had.
That was so you're either going to take.
I'm asking you if it's ethical
once again,
to do that.
Check me on this with Josh Bowen. I am explaining to you why it is ethical to do that at this time. Okay, and you can even take this up with Josh Bowen. Right, this is not something I'm making up. Right, at that time, the options are: you spare the population by enslaving them, you allow them to just be given to nature, which everybody knew would be death. Or you kill them yourself. Those were the options.
I'm not sitting here talking to an ancient Israelite. I'm sitting here talking to CJ Cox, and this is a question to us. It's put forward to us. This question is not put forward to an ancient Israelite. This question is put forward to you. That's why I keep asking, do you find these things ethical? And you keep saying yes.
I have just told you.
So
I just told you at that time, this was the most ethical option available.
If the United States government at this moment were to go to our enemies,
because it's a different time now. We have different things available to us.
It's different now. So it's not ethical now, but it was then. How so and why?
Precisely.
Why?
Because once again, if you are given an option and you have,
you're telling me
however
that
many options you have 6 different options. Okay. If you have nothing,
letting them live
options,
is not an option. Winning the war,
letting them live
is not an option.
At this point in time, letting them live is the same as letting them starve. That was the way that everybody was considering it, and that was the way it actually was.
I hope they never let you into our military.
Once again, you can check me with literally any scholar. Find the most anti-Christian
Dr. Josh
scholar
Bowen is not going to sit here and tell
you
you that the Israelites had no other choice but to kill innocent women or innocent people. So this doesn't
because I've heard him say it in 2 different debates over the last few days. One was Stuart and Matt Dillahunty and some other dude, Stuart and Cliff and Matt Dillahunty, and another one with Dr. Michael Brown. So I've heard it from his mouth in particular twice in 2 different debates. Try again, please.
That was their only option. You heard that from his mouth.
Yes, that the options were
I watched one of those debates, and I didn't hear that from his mouth.
You either enslave them, which was sparing the population, or you let them be just destroyed by the elements, or you slaughtered them yourself. Those were the options in the ancient world. This is what and it wasn't just in the ancient Near East, by the way. Everybody understood this. The Romans understood this. The Persians understood this. The Babylonians actually and the Assyrians would do this thing where they'd literally pick up the population and take them, like literally just assimilate the entire population into their culture, as if this population didn't exist, completely wiping their culture off the face of the planet, right? People at the time.
If Dr. Josh said that, then I would disagree with him. Because, I mean, there's always... I just read to you, CJ. I'm going to read it again. All right. Deuteronomy 20 through 10 through 15 says, "When thou comest nigh into a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it. And it shall be, if it make thee answer of peace, and open unto thee, then it shall be that all of the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee. They shall be made into slaves." Chattel slavery, you've admitted it sometimes in this debate, sometimes you haven't. Chattel slavery, they will be made into slaves if they declare peace, right? So if they declare peace, you're going to let them live, but you're going to make them into slaves. Now, it goes on. "If it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword." Not every male that participated in this war. Every male. The 1-year-old male, the 6-month-old male, every male. Right? You're sitting here and saying that Dr. Josh Bowen is saying that that's their only option. I'm telling you, you are misrepresenting his words. I don't even have to know them to know that. Right? So let's go on.
Okay, so
I'm not done.
Number one.
I'm not done.
Okay, fine, continue.
"And when the Lord thy God, but the women and the little ones and the cattle and that all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given me." Now you're sitting here trying to pretend to answer as an ancient Israelite, as if you could possibly understand the mind frame of people that existed thousands of years ago. This debate isn't about their answer, it's yours. You are saying that is ethical. To be clear.
Yeah, and to be clear, again, I am saying that was the enslavement of populations was commonly known and is commonly known by all scholars of this field to have been the ethical option out of the three. Again, that is what Dr. Josh Bowen said, just for the record, right? Not in particular the judgments, because these you are quoting judgments when you're talking about, well, they're slaying the entire population, right? Because God is just in judging populations. He has that right. You obviously don't believe that this is God doing that, so it's a completely different situation. However, God has the right to judge populations. You already, of course, know that I believe this because I've debated this in numerous times, like Noah's Ark and other things like that. But also, you're misrepresenting even the text itself. When you make peace, you give tribute. You know what tribute is, right? It's where you pay basically taxes to a conquering nation, right? So that you have basically the ability to live within what is considered to be their borders. That is explicitly what you read from the scriptures, is that if they make peace, they're going to, so you're misrepresenting.
No, it doesn't say tribute. If they make peace, you take everybody as slaves. Everybody. That's not a tribute, that's slavery.
It literally explicitly says tribute. You read it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. What are you talking about? And if it will make no peace with thee, but it will make war against thee, then that thou shalt besiege it. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hands, thou shalt smite every man thereof. So when it comes to peace, and it shall be, if it makes the answer of peace and open unto thee, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee.
Should be tributaries unto thee. Exactly. They are paying tribute. It is exactly what it says.
It's slavery. It's slavery.
I mean, you can call it that if you like, but that's literally not what it is.
That's what it is.
Taxes. No, it isn't.
What the?
Like, again, you do know what tribute is, right? It is a very common thing happening all throughout history.
You know what slavery is, right?
In fact, hang on, here's a perfect example of this.
Think
of the Gideonites, right? The Gideonites from Scripture were a group of people who were given this peace. Were they turned into slaves? No, they were not turned into slaves.
All right,
They had to circumcise themselves.
CJ, let me jump in. I think on this particular point that you guys are just going to have to agree to disagree. We're kind of going around in circles here, so I'd just like you guys to move on to another point.
Honestly, what's the fucking use here? Honestly, like,
well, there's like.
What's the use here?
If you weren't prepared to come in to have a conversation about it, then I don't know. But that's the use, in my opinion, was to actually have an ethical conversation about whether or not this was something
I've
that
got
was
what I need from you.
ethical or unethical.
Taking slaves as tribute is ethical. That's your statement here.
That's not actually what it says, though. Once again, tribute it's basically a taxation system. It is not enslaving the entire population. And again, in Joshua, you have the Gideonites who prove exactly what I'm saying, because the population of it's Gibeon, actually, not Gideon. The population of Gibeon was not enslaved. They were made into Israelites, and then they paid tribute, right? That, in fact, they were even protected by Joshua when the rest of the Canaanites tried to come out against them, right?
Are you
so
talking
it's just
about Joshua 25.
I don't know the exact chapter off the top of my head, but it's talking about the Gibeonites when they had basically Joshua makes covenant with them, and then later on they are going to be attacked by the rest of the Canaanites, and Joshua actually comes to their defense. The point being, right, that these people like this. Again, you do know what tribute is, right? It was a common thing that people did all the time. In fact. The Israelites, for most of their independent time period, were paying tribute to other nations.
Tribute isn't slavery.
That's exactly my point. You're making my point.
No, I'm not. These people were put into slavery. That's not a tribute.
Except it does not.
You're trying to call it a tribute.
For ones when it's not in situations outside of peace, right? That definitely happened.
It literally says it, CJ. It literally says it.
It literally says it only for the nations that are not giving peace, right? We literally just read that multiple times. They are tributaries if the nation makes peace. Right, they serve you.
So is ethical to take slaves if they don't make peace?
Once again, in this particular situation, what you have is judgments against God. So, I mean, absolutely. Like this, a group of people that is doing all sorts of abhorrent things, which God would eventually judge the Israelites for as well. God has full sovereignty in judging His creation. And there's no way I could be budged off of that, because frankly, a God who doesn't judge is not a just God. That's as simple as that, really.
Whatever. Yeah, so, I mean, there's really not much more. Like, how much more time do we have on this open discussion? This has been a lot more aggravating than I thought. This is, like, actually one of the worst debates that I've ever had on this, because, at least, the other Christians are trying to pretend like this slavery didn't happen. You acknowledge that the slavery has happened, but now you're trying to say it's okay. And that's very disturbing to me. And it's very disturbing that Christians will find a willingness to do this, and to think that this somehow justifies all of these atrocious actions done under the commands of God Himself. But I was going to bring up Jeremiah 35, because here we have a clear indication of somebody abusing the laws, inhabiting what would be known, I believe, as debt servitude. But I don't even really think I need to. The fact that you think it's okay to take slaves, you're going to justify it. Again, I try to make it time and time again that I'm asking you this question: is this ethical to you? And I'm getting heated because you continuously say that it is because it was ethical to them. And as I pointed out, we as a society, we as a planet, have thankfully evolved beyond these dark ages. Your God would put us back there, and you have shown that clearly tonight. So I think I'm done with this open conversation. It was fairly aggravating for me, surprisingly.
Well, there's like 5
Well, I
minutes
guess
left.
I would just
DJ, there's like 5 minutes left. Do you have like a closing statement for the open discussion here, and then we can move on to Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, while I certainly acknowledge my approach is a little unique, I'm definitely not the only person to have made these kinds of arguments. William Lane Craig and, again, I referenced Clifton Stewart, have made these arguments before I.
Clifton Stewart,
and
that's
Dr. Michael
the
Brown, right, made these
Clifton
arguments
Stewart's
before I
the
did.
dad and
Basically,
son.
there are two kinds of Christian apologists when it comes to this issue. There are honest ones. Yes.
All right.
So there is the honest ones who are going to acknowledge the fact that this did actually occur, but believe that God in his sovereignty and in his righteousness did actually have a reason for this. And there's going to be the dishonest ones who are going to try and claim that this didn't occur, or that it's something that is, just, it's a kind of a condoned, or no, it's not condoned, excuse me, explicitly condemned in different ways or other thing like that, right? Just not true. So we're either going to be honest with this or we're going to be dishonest. I'm speaking to the Christians at the moment. Because I guess that's going to be kind of the end of this. God of the Bible, right? For the New Testament be true without the Old Testament. If you believe in the Bible, that this is what the Old Testament presents you. So deal with it. Be honest with it. I'm trying to be honest with it, and I welcome, and I think we all should welcome us trying to be honest with it, because in my opinion, there is a reason why God give these commands. And again, I think it's pretty clear, as well as the foreigners who live amongst them, because as you see very clearly throughout all of it, it says, don't abhor the Edomite, don't abhor the Egyptian, so on and so forth, right? Was to pull people out of poverty, not to enslave them, not to oppress them, or not to do anything of these sorts.
CJ, I'm gonna have to interrupt you. I know I said that there was 5 minutes left, but I didn't mean that you could take that whole 5 minutes. Right. We want to get onto the Q&A here, Dr. Josh had asked in the live chat if there's going to be an after show. So I informed him that yes, there will be an after show. I don't know what Rage is going on, but if he can't be there, I'm going to open up a after show, because I definitely want to hear Dr. Josh's viewpoint on this debate.
Yeah, I'll let you set it up in StreamYard. I'll come in for a little while. I don't have all night, but I'd love to come in and sort through this a little more.
And then, so I guess the first question is not really a question. I'm gonna give it to CJ though, because Dr. Josh has just posted in the chat. It might be worth it to read Joshua 9:22 to 23. Do you have your Bible handy, CJ?
I do have the internet handy, so I could just kind of look it up here real quick.
Joshua 9:22 to 23. Dr. Josh seems to think that'll be probative to the discussion here. And then you can find that and read that while I am bringing up the questions that I screenshot here.
I got it right now.
Oh, okay.
It says, then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, why did you deceive us by saying, we live a long way from you, while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God.
Okay. And Mr. Boomer here, again, is having a tough time finding where on my computer all the screenshots I took are. I am used to having them on my phone, but I couldn't do anything on my phone tonight because there was more than one chat to keep track of. So
we made it hard on John, and I made it even harder because I was unexpectedly a bit unruly, so I apologize, John.
No, you're all right. It's so funny. You're the one that's unruly and live, and CJ's unruly on social media. So it all evens out in the end. Okay, now I've gotten it up, but actually I'm going to have to X this out here. And my computer's operating rather slowly.
I forgot. I turned my camera off so y'all didn't see all my face palms, so I shouldn't have done that.
So is there like big hand marks on your face now?
Yeah, probably.
I mean, CJ was on camera, but I think he was mentally face palming at many of your comments there too, Knox. So I think that's even too. All right, this is cool. Dead air for a stream because the old dude can't figure his damn computer out.
It happens, John. Take your time, man.
Okay, yeah, all right, I got it. All right. Da-da-da-da-da. And why are they not opening? Okay.
We will get to your guys' questions sooner or later.
Yeah, we will. I promise. And none of you will be on retirement by the time we do. I promise. Okay. First question is from Agnostic Pagan Mom, and this goes back to something you were saying earlier, CJ. And Agnostic Pagan Mom asks, so why isn't prostitution fully legal? I think that might be in regards to, what Knock had been reading out of the Bible and asking you about them being able to take women as concubines, as you referred to them.
Well, so there is a kind of a conflation, I guess, of things. So the Israelites, it doesn't appear that they were actually allowed to take concubines. They actually had to marry. Now, certain people definitely did. David and Solomon and all that, they absolutely did. But if you look at the actual rules that are provided, it is pretty clear that. Right, exactly. But the Bible does actually even condemn that. Like, Solomon is condemned for his lusts. David is condemned for his lusts.
Solomon was God's dude.
That's
what
not
are you
actually.
God, Solomon was God's favorite dude on this planet.
That doesn't mean he wasn't condemned. All of God's dudes were condemned. What are you talking about, bro?
He had 1,000 concubines, and God loved him. What are you talking about?
Face was literally so condemned he wasn't even allowed to enter the promised land. Like, do you even Bible, bro?
I read the Bible, and I read clearly, God.
The Bible's pretty clear about the flaws of its heroes, my dude.
Solomon was God's favorite person on the planet while he had 1,000 concubines. Is that not correct?
That's definitely not the case. You definitely need to reread that. However, I would like to get back to actually answering my point because once again, every single person in the Bible was actually condemned at least at some point in time. And by the way, Solomon was not God's favorite person. David was the man who was a man after God's own heart. So just another correction that I want to get there. However,
did they live at the same time?
If you actually read the laws that we have here, for example, in Exodus 21, it does make pretty clear. Can I actually answer the question? I mean, this is a Q&A.
You keep saying nonsensical shit, though.
Literally proving you definitively wrong, but whatever.
But, I mean, well, check it out. Well, hey, hold on, CJ. Check it out. So, yeah, I think we would be best to conduct this, Q&A, much like James does on modern day debate, and not turn each question into a back and forth. Both of you have a chance to respond to each other's questions, but, just in short order. And then I would just say to CJ, just go up and wrap your point up. And then if Knock has a comment short comment to make about it, then we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah. So if you go to Exodus 21, I'll just read Exodus 21:8. It's saying, if she please not her master who's betrothed her to himself, then, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her to a strange nation, he shall have no power. It continues to say that if she's betrothed to a son, she's treated in the manner of daughters. If he takes another wife, her food, raiment, and her duty of marriage should not be diminished. In other words, the Bible doesn't support prostitution, sex slavery, or concubinage. It makes pretty clear that if you're going to buy a slave and then try to sleep with her, you need to actually turn her into somebody who would now be equal with you in the sense that she's now your wife, right? She's not a slave any longer. If you want to be with this person, she needs to be your wife.
Okay. And then, Knock, do you have any short reply to that?
Didn't God command Abraham to sleep with his maidservant and have a child by her? And then when he did, like, there was this whole like sacrifice thing. I don't know. I don't think God has much of an issue with concubines. I don't think ancient Israel had an issue with concubines. I think that the upper classes, it was a common practice. And Solomon had 1,000 of them. And he was like, as I said, the Bible says it clearly, God's favorite dude on the planet at the time. As far as I know, Solomon and David didn't live at the same time. David was far before Solomon. I don't know your point there.
Boy, that was really uncomfortable. You just sounded like Matt Powell. Did you say, hold on. You just said the Bible says, kind of creeped me out there. You sound like Matt Powell. All right, this next question is kind of related to that last question, but this is for Knock from Jamie Russell in CJ's chat. If it was enslavement, why would they even mention the option to be joined to the master's family?
So are you talking about Israelites or chattel slavery? And I think that it depends on what time period you're talking about. Laws did change over the course of ancient Israel. As far as I understand, laws did become more moderate as they went along, and eventually, as far as I understand, the Israelites got rid of slavery altogether, which would indicate that there was some opposition within the society at the time to the practice, and that at some point the Israelites did indeed find it unethical and immoral and stop the practice.
Okay, so I have to say something very briefly because I can't let it actually go unresponded to. So first and foremost, Sarah told Abraham to sleep with Hagar, not God. God actually explicitly had a problem with that and only blessed Ishmael and the union because he loved Abraham, not because there was anything good about that union. Also, it is, again, very clearly laid out that Solomon himself laid out. That Solomon himself was actually condemned for his lusts, for his going after other gods. There's actually numerous things Solomon is condemned for. And all of the heroes of the Bible, with the exception of Jesus, are condemned at some point in time.
And again, we're going to have to move on. Again, please think modern day debate. The Q&A is not going to be a continual back and forth. Give a little response when the question is directed at you, and then the other person gets to give a quick little response and answer that. But we're done with the open discussion, so please try and keep your response. I know I'm asking a lot of you, CJ, to try and keep your response pithy.
I do keep interjecting on him. I'm sorry. It's just
you're okay. You're okay. But I mean, I think CJ should look into going into radio because he could definitely keep a show going for a while on the radio all by himself for sure. And I mean that as a compliment. All right, this next question is, I believe, addressed to CJ, but of course both of you will have a chance to respond. Would the Bible have been more moral to include the phrase, and I'm presuming in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not own other people as property, no exceptions? Like, couldn't God have done something like that, CJ? CJ?
So I personally believe that would actually end up being problematic. So the first thing, I'll make this very quick. So the first thing is God does want to teach his people about what is the ultimate union that anybody can have, which is indeed a servitude, which is our own service to God. For example, I mean, you see Paul call himself a slave to God, right? So in a way, there is that to be taught in sort of a parabolistic way of itself. But also, as I said, I do think that would actually prevent the Israelites in a lot of ways from actually maintaining the level of middle class, if you will, that they actually ended up having. The whole thing is designed to keep people out of poverty. And unless there was a better option, then no, I actually don't think that would be more moral.
Well, before Knock responds, I just myself have a follow-up question to that. Then, so is it your contention that every type of slavery in the Bible was intended to pay off a debt or to pull somebody out of poverty?
So not necessarily the first one, but the second one, yes. Slavery as a whole in the Bible is intended to be something that brings people out of something that brings people out of poverty. It's not meant to be something that oppresses people. And this is a repeated motif all throughout the laws and the prophets. You don't oppress the foreigner. There's no lack of justice for the foreigner. Treat yourself the same as you treat the foreigner. I mean,
well, that answers my question. But let's let Knock very short response to the question, and let me just say before Knock goes that. Boy, I really wish I was the interlocutor here so I could respond to what you just said, CJ, but I'm not. But go ahead, Knock.
God works in fucking insane ways. And he's a monster. And of course, if he would have included, thou shalt not own a human being, it would be far more moral. I would say, just maybe not give the orders to put the swords through the heads. Probably would help.
So, all right, this next question is also for CJ, and this goes back to your opening. So I'm not really sure exactly what part of your opening this refers to, but once I read it, maybe it'll refresh your memory, CJ. But Jamie Russell asks, at the synagogue, does that include the mixed multitude? I'm not sure what he's referring to.
Absolutely, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically,
remind the audience what that question pertains to.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea would basically be, there's these the one law that we seem to have that is different for native-born and foreigners is slave laws, and it's only a couple of the slave laws. It's not all of the slave laws, but a good portion of the slave laws. In fact, the majority of the slave laws do seem to be Israelite specific. Outside of that, the scripture is pretty clear that you actually have to have the same law for the foreigner and the native born. So what he would be referring to is when you had the mixed multitude that came out with the Israelites, came out with Moses from the Exodus, are those going to be from the native? I think the answer is clear if you look at the fact that they actually did end up converting to the Hebrew religion, circumcising, and then were grafted in to the Hebrew people, which means they'd be following the native-born law. They would be considered Hebrew people. And basically, to wrap it up, Hebrew is not a racial designation; it's a ethnic designation, just like American is, right?
Okay. All right, Knock, do you have anything to say about that?
CJ quite clearly, even though he was really wish-washy about the chattel slavery, did at points admit to the corporal punishment used to punish slaves, servants, whatever you want to call them, tributes, whatever you want to call them. And he has maintained that that's ethical. So according to CJ Cox here in this debate, you can go to Applebee's, and as long as you don't poke their eye out, you're good. Because it's a better system, y'all. Fucking God.
All right, this next was from Cider and Port, from Steven. He says it's more of a comment, but of course you both can respond to this. We'll let Knock respond first since the last few questions have been for CJ. But the problem with being owned as a slave, Steven says, is you lose the freedoms and liberties that you as a conservative is meant to care about. So, okay, well, I guess that is kind of addressed. It is a comment, but he is addressing you, I believe, CJ, because he's bringing up conservatives. I think his point is that you're kind of shilling for biblical slavery now, but slavery in and of itself would go against your conservative values.
Well, and so that's a pretty interesting point to bring up, because that is something that I myself have had certain issues with, is reconciling things like not even just slavery but biblical authority in general with my incredibly strong constitutionalist leanings. And the explanation I would have for myself at the moment, which would probably change in the future because I am still fairly young, is that I believe that the Bible is actually trying to lay out something that does indeed respect the human liberties of people. The only thing that I personally could see making it more libertarian would be applying all laws to all peoples. and maybe not using some of the same language that is used only because it sounds weird to us. Like, for example, he just said, so long as you poke an eye out, it's all good.
All right. Knock,
but as, once again, other scholars will point out, that's not literally what...
Well, I mean, that was literally the law, though. Like, you could beat them as long as you didn't kill them, and as long you can give them a couple days to recover, and if they didn't die within a couple days, then clearly you didn't go out of bounds in your discipline of your slave. Again, I maintain that is not ethical. You're saying, hey, a better system than what we got.
This next comment is from Phi, and I'm assuming, because I remember when CJ brought this up, but so I'm assuming it's for CJ. So Phi says, so the argument is slavery is better than being poor? Really?
So is the argument that slavery is better than being poor? I mean, not exactly. I mean, to an extent, yes. It does depend on the level of poverty, absolutely. Like, there's definitely, like, for example, I would much rather, people often ask the question, like, well, would you be under the system? Well, I mean, for example, I was living in Mexico City, right, or under this system, like living in Mexico City as one of the lower class, the bottom class in Mexico City, or under the system. Absolutely, I'd take the system in a heartbeat. Like,
if there was a type of debt servitude now, like if their slavery exists as it did back then in the Bible, would you be Knox's slave?
I meant to ask that.
I'll be perfectly honest with you, and I even say this with the utmost respect. I don't really. I have some issues with some things that Knox has said in the past that don't lead me to believe he'd be particularly kind to my ilk. However, if we make that question more general, I would absolutely be willing to sell myself into a slavery in this system rather than being in a situation where, I would be potentially starving or homeless. Like, absolutely.
Okay. And Modern Caleb asks, well, actually, I guess this will go to Knock. How is hired servanthood worse than starving?
Hired servanthood isn't indentured servitude. Hired servanthood is, I would say, what we have in our modern system. I apply for a job, I get hired. That's hired servitude, and I have issues with that. But clearly, I still have independence, I still have equality, I still have the capacity to make decisions for myself. Clearly, that would be better.
Bad news, folks. Dr. Josh messaged in the live chat that something came up with his son. He wouldn't be able to attend tonight, so we're going to bag off the after show because Dr. Josh did say he would love nothing more than to participate in a review of this. So
that would be better for me as well, because I did raise my voice and I accidentally cut my camera off when my daughter was here trying to comfort me and bring me down because she doesn't like it when I yell. So I should probably, go spend some time with her.
Yeah. And so I'm going to just throw it out there that we'll set something up for tomorrow night with Dr. Josh. I'll message him and find out what time is convenient for him, but probably most likely be sometime early evening.
Yeah, I intentionally went. I stayed away from reciting biblical scholarship in this debate. I wanted to focus on the ethics of it. I'm really surprised, and I don't know if we have any other questions, John. Hopefully we do, because I'm having fun. But I was really surprised that... I lost track of my thought. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, I guess I screenshot this. It was just a comment. I'm not going to read it. It was not very pleasant. But you know what? I think that's what I did. All right. I jumped over somebody else's question because I was taking screenshots. I had CJ's chat up on the right, your chat up within StreamYard, and your chat up on the left, Doc. And then I took a picture every time there was a a question in one of them, and then so I was confused here. I was just looking at your chat, and there wasn't a question there, and that's because it was over on the other side of the page here. Ian Spiker asked from CJ's chat, Rage, Group B attacks Group A. Group A wins the battle. Should Group A let the survivors of Group B go back to their people, kill them all? Oh, okay, so it's just not worded. Should Group A let the survivors of Group B go back to their people? That's option one. Kill them all, option two, or take them as slaves.
Go back to their people. I mean, that's kind of what we do in modern wars, right? So we'll win a war, right? And so United States will have influence over the decisions that Iraq is making, but they're still their own independent nation, right? We're not going to put all the males to death just because, they resisted. We're not going to do that. So clearly, allowing them to keep their culture, clearly allowing them to keep their independence, issue settled. We killed a lot of you. You killed some of us, but we won. Ha ha ha. That gives us benefits, but that doesn't give us rights over you as human beings. Hell no. Hell no. With a double hell no.
CJ, you have any comment on that?
I mean, not really. We've had our back and forth, I guess, on that. So,
All right. So here's a comment that was in CJ's chat that I'm going to turn into a question because I'm curious. Daniel Marson says, or Marson, I'm not sure how to say that. He says CJ is killing it. Rage is out of his depth. Why doesn't Rage try and stick to historical context instead of constantly virtue signaling? And the question that I would take out of that is for you, CJ. Why would your all-powerful God need to, consider cultural context in, meting out his objective morality? I mean, if owning people is wrong now, why wasn't it wrong back then in the eyes of God if he's the objective moral standard?
Well, so what I would say with that, it's not that that's a bad question, by the way, so I don't want to sit here and pretend that it is. But I think people fundamentally misunderstand, number one, the idea of a moral dilemma and objective morals, right? So if objective morals are indeed a thing, right, there can be morals which are objectively worse or are greater duties or however you want to word it, right, than others. In fact, if you think about another absolute thing, right, 2 is absolutely greater than 3 precisely because they have absolute values. If they didn't have absolute values, you couldn't say that. So if you're given a situation where you have 4 bad options, the least evil option, even though it is still an evil option because the morality is objective, it becomes the good option because you only have bad options. So that's one thing I would want to point out. And just briefly, because I know I don't want to turn this into a diatribe, as far as the claim to, why would an all-powerful God need to operate within the confines of humanity? God has decided that we are to live this kind of a life. I don't really understand why. I just am being honest with that. God, because it always goes back to the question, why even create man in the first place? I don't have an answer for that yet. Maybe some other theologian does. But I think the best answer is that it is the best way for us to come into willing and genuinely loving relationship with him.
I think that God created us because he didn't have access to Barbie dolls or G.I. Joes. But
I want to answer that because, it was kind of directed at me.
What's that? Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
They referred to why didn't I stick to history, and I kind of got to that point, and then I forgot my point as I was making it, so I didn't get there. Usually in these slavery debates, I would include a lot of history, and Dr. Josh, who's in the side chat, could attest. I know the history behind this. He sent it to me, so I have the history. I could have used a lot more actual historical data. I used a little bit in my opening in regards to correlating slavery in the South, antebellum slavery here in the South, the laws of that surrounded that abuse with the laws that surrounded the slavery of Israel. Now, I don't think that we have. There is some evidence of abuse that we have in the Bible itself, Jeremiah 35, but it's literally impossible to go back 2,000 years and say that like the abuse was to the level of antebellum slavery in the South. But we can, I think, make a fair assumption that giving similar laws concerning the discipline of slaves, that similar atrocities could have happened within that system. But outside of that, I didn't use history because that is basically, to me, that's for a debate about whether or not God condoned slavery, and I've had a couple of those, and in those debates I will often pull from historical scholars, especially evangelical Christian historical scholars. This was a debate about ethics. So essentially, as I explain what ethics is CJ's ability to process basically what is right and wrong. And we have gotten the answer to that. Because, he wants to answer as an ancient Israelite. But the question was posed to him, and we have clearly gotten that, sure, this is ethical. So in that regards, in my opinion, this means that this particular debate is a push, right? Because to him it is ethical. To me it's not. That's a push. But it's kind of shitty on his part.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, let's move on there. And just to be fair, because I've, been holding CJ to pithy responses, so I need to do that to you as well. But we did get your point. This next thing is from an agnostic pagan mom. It's more of a tongue-in-cheek thing, pointing out an error you made, CJ, when you and Knock were arguing back and forth about the difference between tribute and whether it's slavery. And when you were talking about tribute, you said tributary, and she just wants to point out to you that the subject is slavery, not land features, which a tributary would be, which would be an offshoot of a river tributary. But all right, let's see. It might be it. Oh, that's funny. I clicked on my next picture, and it was a meme of Donald Trump. So that must be all of the questions I had. Now, there's a couple other questions here that I had jotted down. And just one comment I want to make. You had said early on, you had brought up that if someone is selling their daughter, that it's into slavery to be a laborer, that it would be that they would make them their wife or their concubine. So yeah, it's not to make them a laborer. It's just to possibly set them up to be raped. And that's what I'm not understanding. I mean, you said that as if it was a better thing, but if you're being sold to somebody to be their wife or to be their concubine, you're essentially selling your daughter to be a sex slave, aren't you?
I didn't even really get into that, but yeah, please answer.
So no, and let me tell you why. Right. So first off, I think we do need to acknowledge the fact that the crime of rape is a primarily psychological crime. What does that mean? That means that the action you take doesn't actually matter. The consent is what matters, right? If you have the consent, then you can be just as brutal and violent as you want. If that's what she wanted, that's what she wanted. Or if that's what he wanted, then that's what he wanted, right? Like if you guys are coming together and having that's why, things like the BDSM, and not to get explicit, but that's why all those things exist, right? Because consent is actually the primary thing at play there. Now, in situations in the past, we come from a decidedly 21st century point of view, but what we need to understand is that even as little as 100 years ago, the idea that you actually had choice in marriage was not really a thing, right? Arranged marriages were just kind of the way that it was. And so you're not going to have that same, psychology of consent as far as that particular situation is concerned. Now, if you were to sell somebody today, right, since they have a freer, ability to choose their romantic life, right, that would have a significantly worse psychological impact on them than if you were to do that 150 years ago, when literally everybody, including the men, by the way, unless they were rich, wouldn't actually have choice in the people they were marrying. It's just the way that it was.
Okay.
And that's not my brain hurts now. I can't even.
I mean, well, here, just let me lead you into this then, Knock, because one thing that CJ did say that kind of gave me pause for thought is it's stretching it a bit, but he is right that up until very recently, most women didn't have the choice over who they married in a lot of cultures. And it still goes on in this.
That's why we live in a better world. And
right. And I'm not saying it was still wrong, in that time. But if you're talking 2,000 years ago, and I
mean, it was culturally acceptable to most Germans in Nazi Germany. What was going on? Does that make it okay? Fuck.
Okay, so
it would if God
you
did
believe in objective morals?
It would if God did it, wouldn't it, CJ? Oh my fucking God.
So I just want to be clear, though. Are you now defending objective morality?
What? What objective morality is there?
You just said it wouldn't matter if it was culturally significant because what's wrong is wrong. So do you believe morals are objective?
I think morals are objective to the individual. I've actually put several streams out about this. My morals to me are objective in my universe. Yeah, sure. But when it comes to objective morality, hell no. And especially when you're talking about objective morality from God, because every single fucking Christian is fucked up in their own way. So no.
So all right.
Well, then, I guess it is culturally important. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to move on to something else here. Just a couple other questions, and then we can close this out. We can, give you guys a couple minutes to make your final statement. Now, you had early on, CJ, you had said that slaveries aren't passed on generation to generation, and the reason I wanted to ask you about that is, I mean, in my reading of the Bible, that there are slaves that are absolutely passed on as property, generation to generation.
I actually read it. Passed on as inheritance. So your whole 15-year thing is out.
I mean, and then on top of that, just to give you the whole thing, and then this will be the last thing. Is not mention a specific verse, and then how about the loophole where you let your Israelite slave go after 7 years, but if he has a wife or a child, you keep the wife and child, and that's forever. And then, but the Israelite slave, the man, can, if he doesn't want to leave his wife and his child, then he can say to his master, well, I don't want to leave, I want to stay here, and then he is a slave for life.
Well,
and that's
just to kind of clarify, to make John's point here, that only involves if a master supplies the wife and a child it comes about of that. It doesn't apply if the slave had a wife prior to becoming a slave. Now, that wife could have a personal debt to the master and would have to pay off that debt herself in her own time. But that would apply only if you come into slavery and you're unmarried, or if you come into debt slavery and you're unmarried, then if your master provided that wife and then a child produced from that child and the wife are property of the master.
Well, yeah, and so that's just generally speak to that. Like you made the claim, they're not passed on generation to generation. There's very many instances in the Bible where they are, and not only that, but even with that 50-year jubilee. Is that what it was, CJ?
Yeah, 50th year.
Okay,
Puff does have a good question. Just to put it out there, we will get to it.
Given what's that?
Puff has a question. Finish your thought, but I just wanted to let Puff know we won't miss his question.
Yeah, okay, I'll get it. But so, given life expectancy 2,000 years ago, I mean, even if you were made a slave at 20, I mean, that's much a lifelong commitment. If the jubilee's every 50 years, I mean,
It's 15, I believe. 15 at the longest. Am I right about that?
Well, no. So there's quite a few things there, right? So the first thing is when I was talking about passing them on generation to generation. So the point that I was trying to make is that the system is not designed to have slaves passed on generation to generation. Now, and I pointed this out in the debate, like in the actual back and forth, right?
Not designed for Israelites.
There is. So when you look at Leviticus 25, right, there is earlier in the chapter before you're even addressing the concept of slaves, so it doesn't have anything to do with Hebrew slaves or foreign slaves. It's not actually addressing slaves; it's addressing Sabbath years, right? You see the talk about this jubilee where it says there is liberty throughout the land and to all its inhabitants, and I think that this was Leviticus 25:10, but I was actually quoting it when we were doing this, right? It also does state that the Hebrews are the only ones who have the 6-year rule applying to them, not the foreigners. And so logically, you would have, something that you had to do with these other slaves, of course, and they decide, all right, so if you die, right, you're going to pass these slaves on to your kin, in this case, probably your sons, right? But the only way you can take this chapter
it does not make this clarification. It does not.
No, I'm not done.
It does.
Okay?
You're
the only
lying.
way you can take this chapter consistently
You're
is if you
lying.
recognize that it's already previously said before this that every 50th year there is going to be a freedom proclaimed throughout the land. So either this is explicitly contradicting itself, which is the only argument you can make if you don't think that this applies to the foreigner, or this is making the claim that this is obviously what's going to happen with these foreign slaves, but every 50 years, as has already been pointed out just 14 verses earlier, there is going to be a jubilee, which, by the way, gets me to my next point. Not 14 verses, sorry. I think it's more close to like 30 or something, but nonetheless. The Jubilee is not every 50 years since the time you were bought. It's every 50 years on a kind of like on its own calendar, right? So if you were purchased 2 years ago and the Jubilee is in 2 years, then you're free in 2 years.
It could be 50 years, though.
It could potentially be as long as I guess technically be 49, but yes.
So what was the common life expectancy in the Middle East and ancient Israel?
I
mean, I don't know the exact number.
I think we have a pretty good idea.
I'll bet you it wasn't more than 40 years old.
All right, so
we got a question. But even if you're considering that, right, like that 1/5 of these slaves potentially, beliefs. Right?
All right. Stop. Both of you, stop. Okay. So there's one more question from Puff, and Puff, just so you know, wasn't even looking at the chat. I was done taking questions like a half hour ago, and I was on another screen reading those questions. I had screenshot throughout the debate. But Puffalupicus asks a question of CJ. In every era where there was slavery practice, there were people, namely scholars, that spoke out. I guess he means humanely against it. How could it be moral?
I mean, I guess that claim doesn't. It's just kind of a non sequitur, unfortunately. Like, scholars can say whatever they want. Just to give a perfect example,
just forget this mention of scholars. He's making the point that in every era where slavery existed, there was always people that spoke out against it and said that it was wrong. So why is it?
Well, so I would still have to make this first point, and I do have a second point to be fair, but I would still have to make this first point, which is
sure.
simply that, I mean, throughout every era that governments have existed, people have believed that the government has the right to kill dissenters. I obviously think that that's abhorrent, right? But in other words, just because people have thought something at every point in time doesn't really mean anything. But I would also point out, none of these other people are dealing with Israelite slavery. Everybody likes to, I know a lot of the secularists like to claim that, this is really the same thing. I've read the Code of Hammurabi. No, it is not the same thing, right? It's just simply not the same thing. The Hebrew Code is leaps and bounds ahead of any slavery code that anybody has put forward.
You're wrong. You're just wrong there. There are a lot of similarities. There are differences.
Not though.
There is a general code that goes across that area. Israel fit within it. Israel, over time, got better about some of their laws, but as did other civilizations in the area at the time. Yeah, you're just wrong.
You're not, though. I mean, you can read the Code of Hammurabi for yourself. It is very clearly, and I'll just give a real quick example. Actually, so I already pointed out in Exodus 21, the Hebrew word that is actually used.
You don't see him as an expert.
If you kill a slave, right? The Hebrew word indicated there, it actually indicates that you have the death penalty, right? This is in Exodus 21, which even according to secular scholars is the earliest, right? Me and the secular scholar would agree with that. But if you go to the Code of Hammurabi, if you kill a slave, it's only 30 shekels of silver, which is the common price for a slave. So clearly those are not the same thing. Clearly one of those values the slave more than the other.
I don't have my exact resourcing here, but I know that like the Jews had some kind of same system. It was a certain amount of shekels of silver for most instances.
Yeah, if you got gored by an animal.
For most instances, very similar laws across the Near East at the time, but continue with your tirade of absolute bullshit.
It's literally explicit fact, but okay. I mean, you can claim all you want. The thing is I have the truth on my side. Hammurabi's code explicitly says that killing a slave is 30 shekels of silver. That's the punishment. Exodus 21, on the flip side, is saying not the exact opposite, but is saying that the punishment for killing a slave is death. Those are facts, whether you want to deal with those facts or not. And running away from them, quite frankly, just makes my position look better. So by all means,
no, it don't.
All right, hey, real quick, I just want to point something out to Puffalophagus, who seems a little, I don't know, like butthurt that I've missed this question. And I said, hey, you know, we started the Q&A. I mean, we started the Q&A, and I said to him, I'm like, well, hey, we started the Q&A, and you know, like 30 minutes ago, I've been watching the live chat, yada, yada. And he said that, I literally posted my question 30 minutes ago. Puff, it is now 9:55. You posted your question at 9:42. I mean, that's nowhere literally near a half hour ago. But anyway, love you, Puff. Love you. Yeah, I'm 57 years old, and older people, time goes faster for them. I think maybe you might have a time frame of a 57-year-old, Puff, if you think it was a half hour ago. So, look, we're going to give each person closing remarks. Take up to 5 minutes to say your piece and you know, insult your interlocutor if you want. But CJ, we will allow you to go first. CJ?
Well, yeah, so I just want to obviously say I appreciate, again, having the conversation. Obviously, this is what I aim to do for my career, is being an apologist, so hopefully this is something that we have a lot more of. So what I think has been clearly laid out in this conversation is, number one, that the system of slavery as of poverty rather than oppressed them. Number two, that the rights of the people were recognized in ways that they were not recognized anywhere else at any other point in the world, including but not limited to not being able to just go around beating your slaves, not being able to kill your slaves, and in fact even having a death penalty for it, cosmetic damage causing your slaves to be made free, so on and so forth. And number three, that given the time period and the methods that were available to the Israelites at that time, that this was indeed the most ethical option that was available to them, and I stand by that. And I would debate that with anyone else at this point. I mean, you can get some Dr. Joshes or Matt Dillahunties or what have you, right? Because this is something that I actually firmly do believe. It seems to me like the only actual response we have to this, when people are actually seriously trying to attack this rather than just address it honestly, is bloviation and insult and anger. And to be frank, that tends to be what we usually see in any moral conversation regarding the Bible. It doesn't matter if we're talking about homosexuality. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the destruction of the people in Noah's day. Whenever we seem to have a conversation about morals and the Bible, there's one group of people who they may believe it, they may not, but they're actually taking it seriously, and as a result, are dealing with it honestly. And there's another group of people who just want to get mad at it because they don't like the rules. Frankly, I believe that we are currently in the latter of that conversation, but we usually are when we have these conversations. So it's not like I was expecting anything different. I think it's clear. This system, when you compare it to any other system that has existed throughout history, is easily standout, unique, progressive, well ahead of its time, and unmatched bare minimum until the last 100 years. You can make arguments even for the last 100 years, and I think, interestingly enough, if we were having a political conversation, all of the progressives in this audience probably would make the same arguments that I'm making, as far as thinking that we have some pretty terrible things going on in the modern day with 1.5 million homeless and so on and so forth. But with that, I would just say if anybody wants to obviously check me out, go to the Synagogue on any social media or anything like that, as well as video streaming service, YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, whatever it happens to be. I do apologetics, talk about news, going to get into history and philosophy, all that kind of stuff. My name is CJ Cox. God bless you. And that's about it.
All right. Knock, your closing comments.
All right. Well, first off, despite the heat here, and as aggravating as this debate was for me, I do want to acknowledge that on an unrelated topic, CJ Cox has made me smile several times today. I'm actually really happy with CJ Cox today until this debate, and this debate is its own thing, and CJ, we're going to have to talk about this some more, my dude. But I just want to go back to my opening. Because slavery is wrong. Slavery's wrong. I'm sorry, owning another human being is wrong. And it's wrong for reasons. And I listed some of those in my opening, and I just want to reiterate it as I close. Slavery increases total human unhappiness. The slave owner treats the slaves as the means to achieve the slave owner's ends, not as an end in themselves. Slavery exploits and degrades human beings. Slavery violates human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights explicitly forbids slavery and many of the practices associated with slavery. That was something we did as a progressing world. Not something that God did. Ever. Article 1, Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Article 4, Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. All their forms. Even this one. This one is not a better form of anything. It's slavery. It's owning human beings, whether that be through debt slavery or outright chattel slavery. And as happy as I am with CJ today, I'm not happy with any human being sitting here and trying to tell me that being a slave is better than being poor. We live in the world and the land. We live in the land of the free. And we live in a world that is tending towards democracy. But we have to fight for that. And the first fight, it starts in the fucking Bible. That's my closing statement.
Okay. Just want to remind everybody, me and Knock are live every weekday at 10:30. We are going to try and set up a review of this on our channel tomorrow. And CJ, you are invited to that if you'd like to join me, Knock, and Dr. Josh.
If he can tomorrow, he said, we will.
Right, I gotta send him an email. He's going to check his schedule and make sure that he has free time for tomorrow. And I also want to point out that you should watch at 9 a.m. every morning before our show, Laughing in Disbelief.
Good show over there. Good show.
Our sister show, I guess. Or maybe we're their sister show. I'm not sure which it is. We will probably replay this debate again on our new channel when we get it rolling. And as Knock was pointing out in our stream earlier today, we want to do more debates on our new channel. So please get a hold of Knock if you're interested in debating. I'm sure we will have CJ over on the new channel to debate Knock again.
This was
it's always
the first
very
of many topics, CJ. We'll nail the second one soon, because CJ put out a list of topics, and I'm down to debate
sure.
one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a spirited conversation when you and
Also
CJ
down. Also down.
and always spirited conversation when you two get together. And yeah, the three of us were having a rather spirited conversation on Twitter today too. So
Yeah, I had to tell CJ and John not to get too pissed at each other until after the debate.
all right, so we're gonna get out of here, I guess. CJ, anything coming up on your channel that people should know about?
Well, so I mean, nothing too big. I'll be talking a little bit about some of the stuff that Max Lucado has said recently, and also some of the stuff that Brandon Tatum has said. Not that those things are related to each other, but if anybody's interested in getting yet another Christian perspective on those things, as if there isn't 1,000 on YouTube already, that's kind of what I got planned for this weekend.
And some of those Christian perspectives are definitely worth watching. Yeah, I was very, very pleased with the Christian perspective of a topic we've been talking about. CJ's Christian perspective. Yeah, I'm actually really happy with CJ today. So.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I was able to see him on a stream earlier today, and I have to say I was pretty pleased with the things he had to say on the topic you're talking about now that we shall not mention.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to mention it in my plug for just come check out Saturday. It'll be worth it. Ryan the Presbyterian.
Well, I appreciate that.
So, all right, we're going to get out of here. I'm going to just throw it to these guys because they're the ones who press the buttons and shit. So they've got to end the stream. I have no control over that. So
yeah, I'm just going to run music for a moment. But yeah, feel free to end whenever you want, CJ. I'm going to go ahead and end out here. Thank you guys. I love my patrons. You guys are the shit. We'll see you tomorrow morning.